Hi there. I'm not a talking dog, but we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. What are conspiracy theories? They're the belief that events are secretly manipulated behind the scenes by powerful forces with ill intent. You got George Soros for the right-wingers, and you got the Koch brothers for the left-wingers, and then you have the classics like the Illuminati, the Stonemasons, Skull and Bones, and of course, the liberals in Hollywood. Scary stuff, I know. Let's look at some traits of conspiracy theories. They always involve a secret plot that only the conspiracists have uncovered. They involve a group of conspirators who believe this special secret plot. And they have some evidence. Sort of. They also have the belief that nothing ever happens by accident. Everything's connected, and nothing can be taken at face value. They get into this mindset of dichotomic thinking. It's either good or bad, black or white. You're either with us, or you're against us. And they like to work backwards from a conclusion, not forwards from the evidence. Let's look at 3 conspiracies and see if we can figure out why people have such weird views about them. We're going to look at the bombs being planted on the buildings on 9/11, the moon landing being faked by Stanley Kubrick, and Hillary Clinton being part of a Pizzagate pedo ring. Oh, those shirts are crazy. Let's start with 9/11 bombs on buildings. So what's the secret plot? It's that the government did 9/11. And it's believed by a bunch of 9/11 truthers and architects for truth. These are people who are architects who believe that the building could not possibly have fallen on its own, or from planes being crashed into it. They have some evidence. There's a little bit of thermite dust that they found in the wreckage, supposedly, and they heard explosive sounds in the videos, and firemen claimed that they heard explosives too. And then there's the optics of the whole thing, seeing the buildings collapse, and as they commonly like to say, World Trade Center 7 didn't have any planes flown into it. And they believe this because nothing happens by accident. It can't just be a terrorist attack, it has to be something more than that. And maybe they're a little bit right. And anyone who doesn't agree with them is a sheeple who believes everything the government tells them. And there must have been bombs involved, because if the government did it and the buildings collapsed, it couldn't have just been the fires of the plane, it had to have been an explosion. The problem is, terrorism happens. Sometimes terrorist attacks occur, like they did on 9/11. The question we should be asking is, did Bush let it happen? And if you read the 9/11 report from the government, you could come to the conclusion that he did. But no bombs. Most of the theories about the bombs have already been debunked thoroughly. If you read Popular Mechanics, or if you just look at the utter lack of evidence of any sort of explosives actually occurring, and the myriad of debunking articles that exist. It's really a poor theory. And most importantly, there's no whistleblower. It's very hard to believe that bombs were planted on these extremely busy buildings, on multiple floors, days before a terrorist attack, with no one noticing, no one blowing a whistle, no trace evidence of any kind involving trucks being moved in or anything like that. We're talking about tons and tons of thermite, assuming that it was thermite. But the conspiracy changes depending on who you ask, which is why it's a pretty poor theory to begin with. Lastly, the buildings did collapse from the planes being flown into them at high speeds. Normally, buildings are not built for planes flying into them at high speeds. Normally, that would be an accident. But in this case, it was done on purpose, and that's why they collapsed. The central structure was destroyed, compromised, and the building collapsed upon itself, as buildings do. I know, no real conspiracy theorist who believes that bombs were planted on the buildings is going to be convinced by this, but this is for normal people who do accept logic. Let's talk about the fake moon landing. So, we didn't land on the moon, it's fake. That's what they believe. Why? I don't know. Now, one problem that came up was that Fox News actually aired a documentary about it being a hoax, and that's quite problematic for a number of reasons. And there are a bunch of references to, theoretically, the moon landing in Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. And people have kind of latched onto this theory in a major way. And anyone who doesn't believe is a sheeple. And going to the moon is impossible anyways. We can never actually escape the atmosphere of Earth, and all sorts of other nonsense that comes up with this theory. Unfortunately for them, there is an aerospace industry. We have NASA, the organization, and there are videos and photos of us doing all these things. So back then, it wasn't as easy to manipulate photos and video like we can today. And while Stanley Kubrick did make a pretty reasonable facsimile of space travel in 2001: A Space Odyssey, there are some telltale signs that it's not real, whereas the moon landing is quite real. And we have a number of journalists, astronauts, scientists, and entrepreneurs who can all prove it's real. Elon Musk is sending rockets up into the atmosphere right now, because at the end of the day, with the right resources and some math, anyone could go to the moon if they really wanted to. Now the last one, and the most creepy one, Pizzagate. Hillary Clinton's pedo ring. I'm not sure why people believed Hillary Clinton was involved in this, but let's go through it anyways. Now, I saw the pizza videos where she's supposedly inside the basement of the Comet Pizza restaurant, and I also read the Podesta Pizza Party emails. Unfortunately, there is no basement in the Comet Pizza, and when it got set on fire, that was proven. So the videos must be fake. And while the emails are real, they could have just been about a pizza party, right? This hoax has been, particularly right now, brought back up by QAnon and 4chan. 4chan is apparently running a big thing on it. I mean, the fact that you can get a t-shirt about Pizzagate is pretty disturbing. I don't know who would wear that. And then there was Epstein's actual pedo ring, which is a real thing, so that is supporting evidence that might lead someone further down a path. They want to believe that there's more to Epstein's child trafficking than just child trafficking, as if that wasn't horrible enough. And if you don't believe it, you're a sheeple. Sheeple is always the answer if you don't believe the conspiracy. And they wanted to believe that Hillary was a pedophile because she was running for president at the time. So I guess that's why it stuck. I haven't really noticed them bringing up Hillary Clinton much anymore in association with this, so that's sort of a telltale sign that this might be bullshit. So there actually is a child sex trafficking ring that Epstein ran. There are flight logs, there were victims who came out, and he mysteriously committed suicide. He did not commit suicide, we all know it wasn't suicide. He was killed by some sort of powerful mafioso in the background. And we have actual evidence of all this stuff, but none of Hillary Clinton being involved. So really, Bill Clinton is very likely to have been a pedo, and there's significant new evidence of that. But Hillary probably not. So let's look at those three conspiracies real quick. Bombs planted on buildings on 9/11. Probably not true. But Bush had significant warning that 9/11 was coming, especially if you read the 9/11 report, and maybe he let it happen anyways. While there's no definitive evidence of that, it's quite suspicious, his behaviors, and also the conclusion of the 9/11 report, it doesn't really work when you think about how much warning he had from the FBI and various other sources that something was coming. Concerning the moon landing being faked by Stanley Kubrick, we landed on the moon. There's just too much evidence supporting that. Unfortunately, we practically gave up on ever going there again, and I don't know why we did that. It's unfortunate, I think. We should really go back to the moon and build a space station there. Lastly, Hillary Clinton's pedo ring. No, she's probably not, but Bill Clinton certainly is, along with a bunch of other oligarchs and royalty, and they should all be in jail, rotting forever. Why aren't they? Why do bad conspiracies spread? Well, people want to believe them. They get invested in these things. They think of something that they believe must have happened, and then they work backwards from that conclusion in order to make the evidence that they have fit. Like in the case of the Hillary Clinton pedo ring, they have the evidence of the sex trafficking from Jeffrey Epstein, and they just work her in there and try to make it so that it's her involved when she probably was not directly involved, but definitely should have known what was going on. I mean, your husband's involved. I mean, geez. Anyway, she's not on the flight logs, so we can't prove it. And then refusing to accept opposing evidence. In the case of the 9/11 truthers, they refused to accept that there were no bombs in those buildings, that there was never any whistleblowers, that those buildings actually could have collapsed from the planes flying into them at high speeds, and that rubble did fall on World Trade Center 7 from one of the other buildings, and there's videos of it, but when I show them those videos, they refuse to accept that that's a real video. It's bizarre. Then they become invested in believing their conspiracy theory, and anything that opposes that conspiracy theory is treated as an attack on their beliefs. And once it's a belief, it's very problematic to debunk. There are a lot of people who will use these conspiracy theories to manipulate people, and they'll target them in order to get money out of them for political gain. In the case of the Hillary Clinton thing, it's a very obvious political gain. If people believe that she's associated with a pedophile network, then of course they're not going to vote for her. Of course, her husband was, so maybe it doesn't really matter. Honestly, if they just stuck to the facts on that one, it would have been better. And in the case of Pizzagate, people are selling you t-shirts on this. Why are you buying them? Don't buy those t-shirts. That's ridiculous. And then anyone who won't accept it becomes part of the conspiracy. Now, I'm just a talking dog, but I'm not part of any sort of conspiracy. I promise. So how can you tell real versus fake conspiracies? Stick to the facts. We have Jeffrey Epstein's logs from the plane. We know that Bill Clinton was there. We know that there are multiple victims. They've come out and said so. We should believe them, and they should get their day in court. Whether or not Epstein's dead doesn't really matter. There are many other people involved, and all of them should be brought to task. In the case of 9/11, we know that planes flew into those buildings. Does there really need to be more to it than that? Maybe the government knew about it, maybe they didn't. Probably did. Certainly the government should be called to task for that. And then George W. Bush used that as a premise to go to war with Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. How does that work? It shouldn't, because we need to stick to the facts. Do the real research. Actually look for these things. With WikiLeaks and various other searches possible, you can discover information on anything. And there's no reason to believe the bullshit that people will spew for it. And you gotta look for the whistleblowers, because in any conspiracy, these things involve thousands and thousands of people. And once 100 people are involved, someone's going to talk about it. That's how we know that Bill Clinton was on Epstein's island at least one time. And this is how we know how our government was spying on us, and probably still is, thanks to Edward Snowden, who should be free. Logic test everything. If you already have planes flying into buildings, do you also need bombs to bring those buildings down? Not really. Terrorism is terrorism. You don't need to add on to the terror. That just opens up a bunch of liability, and if you get caught because of whistleblowers, you're in more trouble. So the bombs on buildings on 9/11 just doesn't work. and understand that the world is a chaotic and messy place. Things happen all the time that we can't necessarily explain, but are probably just random chance. Getting struck by lightning doesn't mean that a god is mad at you, it just means that you got struck by lightning. And we have to accept that sometimes. So, I'm not a talking dog, I'm just a person, obviously. But I was too lazy to put on a shirt, so this is what you get. Enjoy!